What's up guys, it's Johnny Candido of Candido Training
HQ.
Today I'm going to talk about something that advanced lifters already know, but a lot of beginners have been asking me this, and I see this a lot on forums, and it's a discussion about what's the ideal or most optimal frequency to train each lift per week. So typically it's usually the bro science, you have to train just once a week each movement, and anything more is overtraining. But then what I've noticed is that there's been such a strong backlash to that now we've been to the other extreme, where I've seen some people say you can't be an elite level powerlifter without squatting, let's say 5 times plus a week. And there's one major issue with both of those viewpoints, is the fact that you just cannot make a statement on what's the ideal training frequency across all lifts and across all types of people. It's because it simply comes down to the variables at play. So if you are trying to emulate either an elite lifter or a friend of yours who is having great results, you can just kind of run down this list and see the differences which may impact why you get better results off a slightly different routine, rather than just trying to mimic him for the sake of doing so. So let's just take a hypothetical here. Let's say someone wants to mimic an elite Olympic weightlifter. Now we have to take into account the fact that the weightlifter is going to be in the prime of his life, he's going to be on drugs, his whole life is going to be centered around lifting weights, and he's also going to be perfectly built, most likely, for the movements that he's performing. When this will aid with his form, which will also be very well developed, so that then he'll have a lessened chance of injury, especially overuse injuries, because he won't have, let's say if you're a tall lifter, he won't have his knees shooting over his toes to quite the same extent you have, because he has very short femurs and is built to squat. And you also have to consider that if someone's well built for a lift, they're performing less of a range of motion and less overall work, even at the same volume in theory. Also, something we have to consider is the fact that tons of elite level powerlifters have trained 1 time a week. And that is something that we just can't ignore. And I know a lot of people want to say drugs, but it's just like I listed, there are tons of factors involved. So you could just write off anybody. You could say for myself, if I benefit more off of higher frequency squatting, you could say it's just because I'm shorter. You can come up with any single reason, but the reality is there are tons of variables at play for everybody. So we can't just cross out those guys like Ed Cohen or Eric Lillibridge or Stan Efferding and pretend like they're just doing it wrong while the IPF guys are all doing it correctly. And it's a big misconception, in my opinion, that all IPF guys train with a super high frequency. And let's be honest, drug testing is not really that effective. So if we just try to emulate all the top drug tested lifters and pretend like it's that single reason that's going to work for everybody, that's just not the smartest idea, considering you're ignoring all the other variables and you're also pretending like drug testing just works 100% of the time. Okay, so now what do we do with it in practice? What I recommend is that you separate it by beginner, intermediate, and advanced stages, and I'll include a link in the description to a video that details exactly how to determine that. It's all about rate of progress, not your actual lifts. Anyways, so if you are a beginner, what I recommend is that you simply follow a program just to the T and you just do that. You don't think about anything because you're just not experienced enough to know the difference between discomfort from fatigue versus actual pain where you might be risking injury. So that's why for beginners, I do not recommend super high frequency programs. Personally, I recommend 2 times a week on all the lifts, and that's why my beginner program is written like that. However, I understand that there are other beginner programs that are written differently, and that's perfectly fine. The point is just pick one that you like and then just do it exactly. Now I will add, the only exception is if you do have a coach. Then you can jump right into higher frequency training without an issue, in my opinion. So then as you become an intermediate lifter, then that's when you should look at what you respond best to and finally adjust your programming specifically to you. Also, I want to say a huge note is to not be afraid to adjust certain parts of programs. For example, if you respond well to the squat portion of the cube method, but you need higher frequency on your bench, don't be afraid to mix those two together, because once again, as I said, there are tons of variables at play for each specific lift too, not just yourself as a whole. So you don't want to just be stuck into one mode of thinking for all the lifts and just let one lag behind without actually addressing it. However, an important note about intermediate level lifters is that I do not advise that you change the frequency over the course of the year. I advise that you stay with the same exact frequency each training cycle, which should be about a month or so that you're able to see progress, and then just keep running that over and over again. You don't really need anything more advanced in terms of yearly planning until you're an advanced level lifter, in my opinion. And if you do change your program, then only change it when you have to, and then stay on that program for as long as you can. The point is, you just don't want to have planned changes ahead of time. Okay, now for advanced lifters, this is where it gets way more nuanced. What you typically want to see with an advanced lifter is that they do have different training frequencies throughout the year. And this is a mistake I see a lot of people do, once again, when mimicking top guys like IPF lifters, is a lot of them don't necessarily train that high frequency in the off season. I think, for example, Josh Hancott mentioned they trains once a week in the off season, and that then he goes up to 3 times a week and trains with a pretty high volume during his actual peaking cycles. While advanced lifters do need more of a stimulus to keep progressing after all these years of training, they're also under a greater risk of injury because they are handling much heavier weights. So over time, if they just keep doing this over and over again, increasing the workload, without taking any periods of just going at a lower frequency or at lower overall volume, then you're going to usually see them run into some issues. And this is why it kind of annoys me when people post the famous quote about if you had to squat as much as possible in a certain time period, like 6 weeks or 2 months, and your life depended on it completely, that then what would you do? Would you squat every day or would you squat every week? And the point is that you would squat every day if your life depended on it, so you should have that same type of intensity in your training regularly. However, the real question you should ask yourself is if you want to lift for 15, 20 plus years and you don't want to have any major injuries prevent you from reaching your potential, what style would you choose? That's really what matters in the long run. And that very well may be a high frequency program, but the point is you just have to consider the long term. Also, a concept that I'm playing around with in my own programming, and I have to say I really enjoy it at this stage of my lifting career, is actually having a little bit of auto-regulation in terms of frequency. So that's what you'll see is, as I said, I'm raising my bench frequency, but I have it set up in a way that I can decide that each week rather than having to pre-plan that and then force myself to stick to the plan the whole training cycle, like I would if I was an intermediate lifter. So that's the thing, is as you get more advanced, there's more wiggle room, there's more variation, both in terms of your yearly planning and also in terms of the actual individual cycles that make up that yearly plan. Alright, hopefully people stop arguing training frequency as if it's not one variable that needs to be put into context to make any type of decision on it. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching, guys. Peace!
Presentation is everything, tell them wait till I played it, patience, I'm fake. Like outdated denim, hearing it like this, about as rare as a cadence. The boy got some Miles Davis in him, talking all that jazz.
Man, fuck a shooting star. Biggie died, they shot a star. Who you know in West LA? Bring that ruckus to MA. Jeez.